All right, let us begin. Welcome to the last lecture in CVSP 201, a lecture on Virgil's Aeneid. Now, when you go to the movies, just before the movie begins, they tell you, please turn off your cell phones and put them away. And we're going to ask the same thing here. Please turn off your cell phones and put them away. Don't use the cell phone while the lecture is on. Or a laptop, for that matter. What you have with you is a fly sheet that gives you a summary of the lecture. Page 1 and page 2 give you a summary of the lecture, and I shall be pointing out, I'll go through it in detail with you. Page 3 contains some central quotations, which I shall read to you and analyze, and they will be flashed on the screen at the same time. Now, the lecture is on Virgil's Aeneid, a scary title, but don't let it frighten you, because the epic is called the Aeneid because the main character, the hero, is named Aeneas. If he were named Nabil, for instance, it would be called the Nabiliad. Just like the Odyssey is called the Odyssey because the main character is Odysseus. But who was Aeneas? Aeneas never really existed. He was a mythical hero who sailed from Troy to Italy and established what later became the city of Rome. The Aeneid is about establishing Rome. And let me begin this lecture with a brief sketch of the history of this great city. How many of you have been to Rome? Anybody? 1, 2. Good, 5, 6 people. I recommend it. It's a good city to visit, full of history. But where did it come from? If you had boarded a plane 2,700 years ago and gone to Rome, you would have found nothing. There would have been no Rome. Where did Rome come from? Its early history is obscure, but it did begin around 700 BC as a tiny settlement surrounded by enemies, and it lived through around 500 years of almost continuous warfare, during which it achieved a series of hard-won victories that finally gave it world domination. At its height, Rome was the Roman Empire. And what you have here is a map of the Roman Empire at its height. It stretched all the way from Britain to the north to the eastern Mediterranean, Lebanon, Iraq, all this area, Jordan, the entire eastern Mediterranean. So the Romans were here 2,000 years ago. The Romans themselves were astonished at the spectacular rise of their city and at its unparalleled success. At the time of Virgil's birth in 70 BC, Rome was the one and only world power. But its power was beginning to disintegrate. The old virtues of loyalty, integrity, and self-sacrifice were collapsing, and there were struggles for power among the Republican leaders. A period of decline had set in. Now, this period when Virgil was alive, this is the period of Julius Caesar. And Rome was split in the days of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was assassinated. But his adopted son, Augustus Caesar, came to power and did extremely well. He completed his father's work. So Augustus lived from 63 BC to 14 AD. He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar, and he ended the Republican period. In 27 BC, he assumed power and declared himself Augustus Caesar, thus becoming the first Roman emperor. Julius Caesar wanted to do that with himself. That was why they killed him. But Augustus did do it. And he was a great emperor. He restored peace to the Roman Empire, imposed order, and encouraged a cultural renaissance. Literature and philosophy flourished during the Augustan period. The peace he established came to be known as the Pax Augusta, or Augustan peace. This developed into the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, 100 years of total, uninterrupted peace. And you should know Augustus Caesar because he came to Lebanon and he loved it so much that he decided to spend the rest of his life here and run the Roman Empire from Lebanon. But after a few months, he discovered that he has to be in Rome or he's going to lose power, so he went back to Rome. But before he went back, he ordered that the temple of Jupiter should be built in Baalbek. So it is to Augustus Caesar that we owe the presence of the temple of Jupiter in Baalbek. Of course, it took a long time to build it, but he initiated the process. One should add, moreover, that when Christ was born in Bethlehem, this was a very rich period. Bethlehem was under Roman rule, and Augustus was the emperor. When Augustus died, Christ was 14 years old and had not yet begun to preach his message. You should also remember that when Christianity began to spread, it was with the Roman Empire that it clashed. And it was the Romans who tried to crush the early Christians. The persecution of the Christians continued for over 300 years until an emperor named Constantine came to power in Rome and converted to Christianity, after which Christianity became pretty much the official religion of the Roman Empire. So this is part one on your fly sheets. And this is interesting historical information. Part two is the life of Virgil. His full name was Publius Virgilius Maro, and he was born on a farm in northern Italy in 70 BC. His health was frail. He died in 19 BC at the age of 51. But in 51 years, he achieved enough to become world famous 2,000 years after his death. He grew up in northern Italy, then went to Rome to complete and perfect his education. In Rome, he became friendly with many important people, including Octavius, the young Octavius, who later became Augustus Caesar. So when Octavius came to power as Augustus Caesar, he was Virgil's friend, and he gave Virgil protection and encouragement. In 30 BC, Virgil's health was so bad that he went back to his farm in northern Italy, to his parents' farm, and spent the rest of his life there writing the Aeneid. And in 19 BC, after the Aeneid was almost complete, Virgil embarked on a trip to Greece, mainly in order to gather information that will allow him to finish and perfect his epic, but he never got there. He got ill on the way and died. And before he died, he ordered that all existing copies of the Aeneid be destroyed. We don't know why he ordered this, but probably because he lost faith in the Roman Empire. And he felt, what am I doing glorifying this empire? But Augustus intervened and saved the Aeneid. So had it not been for Augustus, the copies would have been destroyed and there would have been no Aeneid. So the fact that we're reading the Aeneid this week, you owe this to Augustus Caesar. So why are we reading the Aeneid? It is the national poem of the Roman Empire. And this empire is important because Western civilization grew out of this empire. Western civilization is rooted in the Roman Empire and the ancient Greeks. That's what 201 is all about. And it is on a scale of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. In fact, the first 6 books or chapters of the Aeneid have been called Virgil's Odyssey. In the Odyssey, as if you will remember, Odysseus spends most of his time lost at sea or having adventures in strange lands. Similarly, the first 6 books of the Aeneid present you with Aeneas lost at sea or having adventures in strange lands until he finally reaches Italy. The second part of the Aeneid has parallels with Homer's Iliad. The Iliad, which you did not read, tells the story of the Trojan War, but Hollywood was nice enough to turn it into a movie called Troy with Brad Pitt. I'm sure that most of you saw it, nearly all of you, so you know the Iliad from the movies. So the Iliad is war from beginning to end. And the second part of the Aeneid is also war from beginning to end. It's the wars that Aeneas had to fight in Italy in order to establish the Roman Empire, to establish the city of Rome, which later became the Roman Empire. The basic difference between the Aeneid and Homer's epics is that the content and values of the Aeneid are Roman. Aeneas, the hero of Virgil's epic, initiates the Roman Empire and embodies its values. Virgil presents him as the ideal Roman to be admired and emulated. So what Virgil is doing is that he's presenting you with Aeneas, telling you this is what a Roman should be like. If you're Roman, be like Aeneas. The gods of the Aeneid, moreover, are the same as those of the Iliad and the Odyssey. This is because the religion of the ancient Greeks was transplanted in Rome and, with modifications, became the religion of the Romans. In religion, as in many other fields, the Roman Empire inherited, continued, and developed the tradition of the Greeks. Although the gods remained basically the same, however, their names became different. Thus, Zeus, the father of the gods and the god of thunder and lightning, I hope you remember him from the Odyssey and elsewhere, he became Jupiter or Jove. His wife Hera became Juno. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, became Venus. Poseidon, the god of the sea, the enemy of Odysseus, became Neptune. Hermes became Mercury. But Apollo remained Apollo, so the change of name does not apply to all the gods. So the main theme of the Aeneid is the history of Rome. In the opening book of the epic, Jupiter relates this history in much detail to his daughter Venus. Venus goes crying to her daddy. She says, your wife Juno is going to drown Aeneas. He's never going to make it to Italy. And Jupiter says, relax, Venus. He is going to make it. It's all fated. So Jupiter says Rome's history, the whole thing, has been fated and destined. In this one very important respect, there is no free will in the Aeneid. It is an epic of fate. Jupiter is not going to take any risks with human free will and allow human free will to spoil the destiny of Rome. So he says to Venus, this is quotation number 1, he tells Venus the entire history of Rome. He says this is going to happen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Part of it is here. He says, then Romulus shall receive the people. This is the first quotation on your fly sheets, page 3. Then Romulus shall receive the people, wearing with joy the tawny hide of the wolf which nursed him. The walls he builds will be the walls of Mars, and he shall give his own name to his people, the Romans. On them I impose no limits of time or place. I have given them an empire that knows no end. So it has been decreed. So Jupiter says, so it has been decreed, so it has been fated. I have fated this. I have given the Romans an empire that knows no end in time. It will continue until the end of time. In fact, it collapsed around 500 AD. And in space also, the entire known world will be under the rule of the Roman Empire. But the details, this is important. The main history of the Roman Empire has been fated by Jupiter, but the details have not been fated. What is fated, for instance, is that Aeneas will get from point A, which is Troy, to point B, which is Italy. What is not fated is how easy or difficult it's going to be for him to get there. And in fact, Juno makes it very, very difficult for him to get there. So the Aeneid is not primarily about Aeneas. Aeneas' importance is that he occupies a moment of time in the history of Rome. It was Aeneas who initiated the Roman Empire, according to Roman mythology. He planted the seed that was later to become Rome. As Jupiter explains, moreover, Rome's mission is to unite the world and to bring peace to the world. But how can you unite the world and bring peace to the world? You have to conquer the world. So this can be achieved only after centuries of bloody warfare. For Rome has to conquer the entire world before it can unite it in permanent peace. So the price of peace and unity is a tremendous one. Virgil's aim in the Aeneid, finally, is not only to dramatize the history of Rome and glorify it, but also to save Rome for future generations. Oh, there is a problem. If you build an empire, you have to sustain the empire. And who is going to sustain the empire? The individuals who make up the empire, or who make up the hardcore of the empire, Rome. According to Virgil, in the process of becoming great, Rome lost the very virtues which made it great. The Romans of Virgil's day have lost the virtues of their ancestors. Through the Aeneid, through the example of Aeneas, Virgil seeks to teach those virtues to the Romans once again, thus ensuring the continuity of Rome's greatness. So, if you want Rome or any country to be great, the building blocks of any country, of any city, if you wish, any country, is the individuals who make up this country. So, if you want Lebanon to be great, you have to be great as individuals. If the building blocks are great, then they will produce a great nation. If the building blocks are not great, they will not produce anything much. Don't expect greatness if the building blocks are not great. This is what Virgil is saying to the Romans. Each individual is very, very important in building an empire. Okay. This brings us to page 2 on your fly sheets, section 4, the virtues of Aeneas. So it's very nice to say that if you want to build an empire, you have to be great. But what constitutes greatness? What are the virtues, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that make a person great? So it is this that Virgil tackles in the Aeneid. He offers you Aeneas as an example of greatness. So what are the virtues of Aeneas? The first one is piety. The word piety means reverence, respect, loyalty. Aeneas aspires in a threefold way. He aspires towards his family, he aspires towards his country, he aspires towards the gods. So, with the last as the most important of the three, there is an important passage in Book 2 of the Aeneid that shows this threefold piety in a very clear way. As Troy burns at the beginning of the Aeneid, Aeneas is in Troy and Troy is destroyed by the Greeks. As Troy burns, Aeneas realizes that the battle is lost and decides to withdraw. His father, who is a very old man and unable to walk, asks to be left behind. But Aeneas refuses and insists on carrying him on his back. So here is quotation, this is quotation number 2 on your fly sheets. Page 3, quotation number 2, and it's here on the screen. The noise of the fires was growing louder and louder through the city, and the tide of flame was rolling nearer. Come then, dear father, up on my back. I shall take you on my shoulders. Your weight will be nothing to me. Whatever may come, danger or safety, it will be the same for both of us. Young Aeolus can walk by my side, Aeolus is his son, and my wife can follow in my footsteps at a distance. You, father, take in your arms the sacraments and ancestral gods of our home. I'm fresh from all the fighting and killing, and it is not right for me to touch them till I have washed in a running stream. So there you have this threefold piety. Piety towards the family is obvious. He refuses to leave Troy unless he carries his father on his back and takes him with him. he holds his son by the hand with his wife behind him. So the entire family is there. He saves his entire family. He will not abandon any member of the family. Piety towards the country is also apparent, for Aeneas is bloody with the blood of the enemies of Troy, whom he has killed in warfare. He's been fighting very, very hard. Aeneas defends Troy very bravely and fiercely before deciding to withdraw. Finally, piety towards the gods is obvious, for he refuses to leave his home without taking the idols of the gods with him, and he refuses to touch them because there is blood on his hands, so his father has to carry the idols of the gods. Aeneas' piety towards the gods is clear throughout the epic. He always listens to Jupiter and what Jupiter tells him, except for once when he falls in love with Dido, Elisar, in Tunisia, in Carthage. But when Jupiter intervenes and tells him, leave her and go to Italy, he does, even though he is in love with her. So this is virtue number one with Aeneas, piety, a very important virtue. Another of Aeneas' virtues is dignity. Dignity means three things. First, it means a sense of responsibility. Aeneas has a tremendous responsibility laid upon his shoulders, the establishment of a new country in Italy, and he accepts this responsibility and sees it through. When Jupiter orders him to leave Dido, Elisar, and sail to Italy, it is not only his piety but also his sense of responsibility that pushes him to obey. For one thing, he has committed himself to the Trojans to build them a kingdom in Italy. Moreover, he has a duty to his son, who is destined to inherit this kingdom. Aeneas, then, is a very dependable person. Dignity also means having a strong sense of one's position in society and in history, being proud of being Roman, having a respect for tradition, and behaving accordingly. Virgil wanted the Romans to be proud of their Roman heritage and to take pride in being Roman, just as Aeneas is proud of his Trojan past and of his Roman future, and behaves in the proper way for someone in his position. When he is ordered to leave Dido, he behaves in a dignified manner. Dido collapses and has a long hysterical fit, but Aeneas remains strong and dignified, although he too suffers a great deal. If you want to know exactly what dignity is, simply compare the behavior of Dido and Aeneas after their separation. You probably haven't read this part yet, but when you get to it, it's a very interesting part, book 4, when Aeneas says to Dido, I have to leave. Note how she behaves and how he behaves. The way he behaves this is dignity. Finally, dignity includes under its rubric the virtue of manly courage. Aeneas never runs away from battle. He does not enjoy war, but he fights very bravely and courageously whenever he is forced to. He is definitely not a coward. So dignity also involves not being cowardly in battle. So now you have two virtues, piety and dignity. And each virtue, unfortunately, branches out and has three sub-virtues to it, which complicates the situation. But you have it all here on the fly sheet. The third virtue is sober-mindedness. Sober-mindedness means having a serious, intelligent attitude towards life. It is the opposite of flippancy, of simple-mindedness, of a happy-go-lucky carelessness, or of a rash and fiery temperament. A sober-minded person is balanced, rational, and self-controlled. So if you're sober-minded, for instance, you will not use your cell phones during the lecture. If you're not sober-minded, if you're flippant, happy-go-lucky, so on, you will spend half the lecture texting people on the cell phone. Because he is sober-minded, Aeneas thinks ahead, makes intelligent plans, and reaches balanced, clear-headed conclusions. He is neither rash, nor flippant, nor lacking in seriousness. So, 3 virtues now: piety, dignity, sober-mindedness. The 4th virtue is an easy one: sympathy. Aeneas' 4th virtue is sympathy. Sympathy means a sense of fellowship with all that suffers, a strong feeling of sorrow for suffering humanity. When Aeneas is taken on a tour through Hades, and he is in the Aeneid, there's a chapter where Aeneas visits the underworld, including a place where people are being tortured all the time. When Aeneas is taken on a tour through Hades, for instance, he feels a strong sense of sorrow for the damned souls who are in torment. When he meets the shade of Dido, Dido commits suicide after he leaves her, and she goes to hell. He feels very sorry for her despite her deep hostility towards him. And this sympathy is not limited to Dido, but embraces in varying degrees everything that suffers. It reflects the tremendous humanity of Aeneas. And Aeneas and Virgil and the Stoics in general, they felt that human life is full of suffering, but they also felt very sorry for people who suffer. So we have 4 virtues now: piety, dignity, sober-mindedness, sympathy. The first one is very, very important, and the 5th one now is very important. The 5th one is Stoicism. You have just finished reading Lucretius, and you have been introduced to the philosophy of the Epicureans. The Stoics flourished side by side with the Epicureans and propounded a philosophy that is very different from Epicureanism, and indeed, in many ways, is opposed to it. It was the Stoics who built Rome, not the Epicureans. The Epicureans saw the universe as a chaotic jumble of atoms and empty space. But the Stoics saw it as rational and organized. And they believed that there is a rational mind, God, who orders this universe and presides over it. In the Aeneid, Virgil, who is a Stoic, submits to the gods of the Roman Empire and accepts them. But notice that Jupiter in the epic functions as a rational mind that controls the universe and directs human history. He organizes everything. So through the Roman gods, Virgil introduces this idea of one God who controls the universe and organizes it. So this is a big difference between the Epicureans and the Stoics. The Epicureans believe that the gods exist, but they live on top of Mount Olympus and don't care about human beings. The Stoics believed that there is one God, basically, a rational mind that organizes the universe and does care about human beings. The Epicureans also believed that in order to achieve maximal pleasure, people should avoid public life and public duties. Do not go into politics. Remember the Epicureans? Do not go into politics. The Stoics, on the other hand, insisted on the great importance of politics and indeed on its primacy. Who is going to run Rome if no one goes into politics? Who's going to run anything? Aeneas is the perfect example of a man who devotes his life to public duty. His job is to sail with his men to Italy and sow the seeds of the Roman Empire, and this is exactly what he does. When private pleasure in the form of Dido clashes with his public duty, he abandons Dido for the more important public task of establishing Rome. Very often with people who are political or politically involved, you have a clash between family and public duty. For Virgil, it's very simple. Public duty comes first. Never sacrifice public duty for the family. Another basic difference between the Epicureans and the Stoics is that the Epicureans believed that the goal of life is pleasure. They asked a simple question, what are we living for? And they answered, we live for pleasure. The Stoics, on the other hand, said, forget it. There is no such thing as pleasure, no such thing as lasting happiness. Life is full of suffering, and you had better get used to the fact and deal with it. This is what life is all about. It's full of suffering. Suffering is built into the framework of things, and the proper attitude to life is to train oneself to endure suffering. Sooner or later, according to the Stoics, great suffering is going to come your way. And if you are not trained to absorb the shock and endure the pain, suffering will crush you. So the Stoics trained themselves to endure suffering. Virgil insisted that we should see the tears in things and be prepared. The difference between a Stoic and a non-Stoic is clear in this respect in the story of Dido and Aeneas. I keep coming back to this story. This is how they react when they face the problem of separation. This would be quotation number 6 on your fly sheets. I'm skipping 3, 4, and 5, but read them because they're important quotations. Quotation number 6, Aeneas and Dido were in love, and Aeneas is ordered by Jupiter to leave Dido and sail to Italy, and he does. When he tells her this is her reaction. Her attendants caught her as she fainted and carried her to bed in her marble chamber. But Aeneas was faithful to his duty. Much as he longed to soothe her and console her sorrow, to talk to her and take away her pain, with many a groan and with a heart shaken by his great love, he nevertheless carried out the commands of the gods, and went back to his ships. So with many a groan and with a heart shaken by his great love, he doesn't want to leave, but he has been commanded by Jupiter to leave. So he gives priority to Jupiter's command. The quotation shows Aeneas' piety. He submits to Jupiter. His sympathy, he feels sorry for Dido, and his dignity. He doesn't break down like she does. But it also shows his stoic endurance and of suffering. Although he is shaken to the depths by the strength of his love, he absorbs the shock and is able to deal with his suffering. Dido, on the other hand, faints and finally commits suicide. A fourth difference between the Epicureans and the Stoics is that while the Epicureans did not believe in life after death, the Stoics believed that the soul survives the body and is rewarded or punished after death according to what it has done in this life. Virgil not only states this belief in the Aeneid, but actually devotes all of Book 6 to giving Aeneas and the reader a guided tour of the underworld. Book 6 is fun to read because it takes you into the underworld and shows you you committed this sin, so you end up in this part of the underworld. You committed that sin, you end up in that part of the underworld, and so on and so forth. In this underworld, Aeneas finds his father, Anchises, in the land of joy. But there is a good part in the underworld. If you were a good person in this life, you go to the good part of the underworld, which is an extremely beautiful place. All the righteous are there, and they foreshadow the future of Aeneas himself. It is to this place that Aeneas will go when he dies. So these are the virtues of Aeneas, the 5 virtues, and if you want to be great, adopt these 5 virtues in your own life. Section 5, Aeneas and Dido. So let me end the lecture by visiting once again the episode of Aeneas and Dido. And the reason I'm going to visit it again, because I know that many of you are either in love or are thinking of falling in love or dreaming about falling in love or something along those lines, right? Absolutely. I can read minds, I know. So Aeneas and Dido fall in love, and Virgil gives you his opinion on love, on passionate sexual love. And in this one respect, Virgil agreed with the Epicureans. He took the idea of the Epicureans that the pain of love outweighs its pleasure, and he adopted it and dramatized it in the story of Aeneas and Dido. And Dido should be of great interest to you. Dido is Nassar, and she built Carthage. And Carthage became Rome's great enemy. In the end, it was Rome that defeated Carthage and ruled the Mediterranean. But had Carthage defeated Rome, the Mediterranean would have been ruled by Lebanese, because Dido came from Tyre, from Lebanon. But look what happens to her. Legend has it that Lucretius committed suicide because he fell in love. This legend is dramatized in a poem by the 19th century English poet Tennyson. In the poem entitled Lucretius, the cold philosopher Lucretius is driven crazy by a love potion, and when he realizes that he's in love and there's nothing he can do about it, he prefers to commit suicide rather than continue living. So this association of passionate sexual love with pain dominates Book 4 of the Aeneid, and its presence is apparent from the very opening of the book. So Book 4 begins as follows, and here you have quotation number 7, and it's right there. But the queen had long since been suffering from love's deadly wound, feeding it with her blood and being consumed by its hidden fire. Aeneas's features and the words he had spoken had pierced her heart, and love gave her body no peace or rest. Love is described as a hidden fire and a deadly wound torturing its victim. The distress of being in love allows Dido no peace or rest. Her former tranquility is destroyed. A couple of pages later, Dido is described as follows. This is quotation number 8, the last one. Dido was on fire with love and wandered all over the city in her misery and madness, like a wounded deer which a shepherd hunting in the woods of Crete has caught off guard, striking her from long range with steel-tipped shaft. The arrow flies and is left in her body without his knowing it. She runs away over all the wooded slopes of Mount Dicta, and sticking in her side is the arrow that will bring her death. So Dido is now miserable and mad. She is aflame, and she is compared to a female deer that has been shot and wounded by a hunter. The wound is so painful that the deer has to run back and forth all the time in a vain attempt to alleviate her suffering. This, for Virgil and for the Epicureans, is the reality about sexual love. Although there is pleasure for both Dido and Aeneas after they come together, this pleasure is short-lived. They soon discover that they have to separate, and the suffering resumes. Aeneas, who is a Stoic, is able to absorb and transcend his suffering, but Dido, untrained in Stoic endurance, suffers on such a massive scale that she finally kills herself to end the pain. Which is not to say, of course, that Virgil was against sex and marriage. There are 3 women in Aeneas' life: his first wife, Creusa, Dido, and his second wife, Lavinia, whom he marries in Italy. Creusa gives him a son, while Lavinia helps him to unite the Latins and the Trojans. The function of sex and marriage is to provide children and to bring people closer together. It is only passionate sexual love, not sex itself, that Virgil condemns. Thank you, and good luck on your final exams.